Oh, come on now. You didn't think we'd do this Street Fighter 2 thing without at least one 4x3 DVD rip, did you? Perish the thought. Super Street Fighter 2, released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, also available for Sega Genesis, which we will be looking at tomorrow, is an adaptation of the fourth major update to Street Fighter 2, adding 4 new challengers to the fray, as well as updating the pre-existing cast of 12 World Warriors and Grandmasters with balance tweaks, new moves, and even some new voices, some of which are of questionable quality, and also some of which did not make the cut in the Super Nintendo conversion because Super Street Fighter 2 ran on more powerful CPS2 arcade hardware, which gave the game a much smoother, cleaner look and higher quality cue sound compared to its predecessors, and that was something that the 16-bit machines struggled to replicate. Not that they didn't try though, I mean... Now that, kiddies, is a damn fine intro to an arcade game. More than made up for the lack of white dude punching black dude in the earlier releases. So I'm gonna get this out of the way right now. Like I said, Super Street Fighter 2 graced both SNES and Sega Genesis, and given the choice between the two 16-bit versions, if I had to pick one, I would go with the Genesis version. It might not look or sound pretty, but it's probably the most complete port as far as the 16-bit consoles are concerned. Which is not to say that the SNES version is bad, because it's not. In fact, it's probably the most grounded Street Fighter package on the system, and certainly one that arguably plays the best. Yes, you have that port of Street Fighter Alpha 2 that's something of a miracle that they were able to get to run on the system at all, and yes, it plays fine if you're a fan of load times on your Super Nintendo game packs, in which case Fatal Fury 1 says hi. Anyway, Super Street Fighter 2 brings back the original 8 World Warriors, the 4 Grandmasters, each of whom have been updated with some new moves and stuff. And of course, as advertised on the tin, they're joined by 4 new challengers: British amnesiac Cammy, Bruce Lee tribute act Fei Long, Native American stereotype Thunder Hawk, and Jamaican stereotype DJ. 1 out of 4 ain't bad, I suppose. I guess. I really don't care. Super Street Fighter 2 gives you more modes of play. Aside from the usual arcade and versus modes, you also have a tournament mode where up to 8 players can participate in a tournament for bragging rights or something to that extent. The tournament is a fun one for the multiplayer people. Everything else, the game gives you some other stuff to do. You know, you got the group battle mode from the Special Champion Edition on Genesis, and you also have a time and attack mode where you have to defeat a very hard CPU opponent in the quickest time possible. So you got some stuff to do. There's some modes of play here. As far as the gameplay goes, that holds up rather well for the most part. You've got all the new moves from the new version at the time included in here. Red fireballs, flaming shurikens, crazy buffaloes, more ball moves for Blanca. Good stuff there. Those are relatively easy enough to pull off if you know the proper inputs, and controls are solid enough that you could generally pull off special moves without a hitch. Though if you got anything resembling an arcade stick, that might work better, but the default pad is more than sufficient. The home versions offer up to 4 stars of speed settings, which is more than manageable. Gone are the days of 10 stars of blazing speed, and this time there are no hidden codes for extra stars unless you're playing this game in the Tokyo Dome. Nobody's going to get that. The tournament mode is a fun little thing if you could get a bunch of people on board, and you don't even need a multi-tap setup, which is nice. You will need 2 controllers at least, even during matches against the computer, because sometimes player will be on the player 2 side of things, and switching to one controller between one side and the other is kinda awkward. So yeah, gameplay wise, the game is fine, but the audio-visual aspect of the port takes a bit of a beating. Super Street Fighter 2 ran on newer CPS2 hardware, which among other things beefed up the graphics a bit so that there's a noticeable visual update in the sprites, and some of the stages if you played the arcade original enough times to notice. You don't really get that boosted on SNES, which shrinks the sprites down, cuts back on the animation frames, and the background quality is almost consistent with the previous version. It's still a decent looking game all things considered, runs fairly well even on the highest speed setting, and even with the cutbacks on animation, movement is still somewhat smooth. Sound also takes a bit of a hit here. While there's still quite a bit of voice bites to be found here, some name callings here and there, but there are some cutbacks. Rounds are no longer announced, for example, but the vocal bits that did make the cut still sound fairly decent, but not quite as clean as they once sounded. Like the previous Street Fighter II games, the SNES version reinterprets the soundtrack to fit its own style, and for the most part, it sounds fine. Perhaps a bit weaker sounding in some places, but you've still got some decent takes here. I particularly like the opening drum beat on Guile's theme. It adds that extra oomph that really goes with everything. Overall, Super Street Fighter II on SNES is a fine update to the classic Street Fighter II game. Has more than enough new moves, characters, and modes to keep things interesting. It might be missing a few details here and there, and it's also a step below what many consider to be the definitive incarnation of SF2 and Super Turbo, or HD Remix, or Ultra Street Fighter 2, or whatever. But the core gameplay is still solid, it's still a fun game to boot, and honestly, if this is the worst version of Street Fighter you ever played in your life, consider yourself fortunate that you missed out on some truly horrendous shit. This is still pretty good stuff. But it's only slightly better on Sega.